Welcome to this meeting about Independent Research Fund Denmark. Mads De Wolf from Independent Research Fund Denmark will present for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have questions, and we have more people from the Independent Research Fund Denmark, and you will present them later. And we'll just say we stream this, so if we have any problems getting through or something, you have to be patient with us, but we'll take that after the presentation. Welcome.
Excellent. Is this on? Yes, it is. Excellent. Hi, I'm Mads. I'm not joined here today by Kasper and Janne, but they did plan this whole thing with me. I'm joined with Lisbeth and Simone, and somewhere Mikkel is here. He's down there. We'll be, as this is the agenda for today, I'll be giving a brief introduction to Independent Research Fund Denmark. I'll be introducing our main research instruments and giving some insights to the application process. Throughout, we'll be drawing on through video on some of our research council chairs. And this is based on, we do this every year, and what we hear every year is they'd like more insight from the councils themselves. So we've tried accommodating that. And we've left lots of room for, after my brief presentation, for you to ask all the questions you might have. And also, if someone is more shy, we'll be standing here from the Secretariat, ready to answer your individual questions. So that's basically the plan for today. We've prepared video interviews with David Dreyer Lassen, who's the chair of the Social Sciences Council, and also Lloyd Gater, who's the chair of the Medical Sciences Council. What does Independent Research Fund do? Basically, we fund bottom-up independent research based on researchers' own ideas. By this we mean that we do not decide what you have to study, but you get to propose excellent research ideas, and we pick the best ones. We aim to fund researchers at all career stages, from PhD and upwards. But as I'll introduce later, we have an instrument geared towards PhD research outside of the universities. I should mention that we are planning on holding a separate information day about this sometime later this year. So I'll only be talking about, we can answer questions about that, but I would hope you would keep those questions for the separate meeting, because it's a weird instrument in our portfolio. I also need to mention that we are not researchers ourselves, we are civil servants. So any questions that do not relate to what an application is in DFF will not be answered. You know your fields best and what excellence means in your field. Yeah, welcome. So this is the organizational structure of DFF. Us mere bureaucrats are at the bottom, and we service the research councils, which cover all scientific fields, or at least we aim to. So there's the Humanities Council, the Natural Sciences Council, Social Sciences, Medical Sciences, and Technological and Production Sciences. Beyond that, we have a cross-council committee, which handles cross-council interdisciplinary proposals. They are formed essentially of the chairman's group, and the board of directors basically handles the grant we get from the government every year, what we should do with the money, and the broader strategic discussions. But all the scientific expertise and the granting of proposals takes place at the council level. Enter. So, what's new in this year's call? Well, this is the call. If you are planning on applying to DFF, you need to read this. However, what's new in this year's call is that it can now be divided into two sections, so to speak. There are the general properties that need to be fulfilled and completed for every application. However, every instrument section is now more independent. So depending on the instrument to which you're applying, you should read that section especially carefully. Also, our DFF International Postdoc now has two application deadlines, one in November and one in May, I believe. and our new rules for the fixed budget, which I'll come into later. We've introduced 2 application deadlines mainly because, well, PhDs finish throughout the year, and this is to accommodate and making sure people don't have to wait too long to start their next step. In addition, our main research instruments have upped their budgets slightly. This does not reflect a strategic decision. This is just normal price increases and inflation, basically. However, notably, DFF Research Project 1 can now be for up to 4 years, but only if and when it includes a PhD student. We've made this table, which kind of summarizes our main research instruments. I'll come back to it throughout. What I'd like to point out now is basically that across councils, there's usually one application deadline. However, for Research Project 1 and Research Project 2, it depends on the council to which you are applying. So please look up the call and check this. But I'll come back to this later. As you can see in the table before, some of our instruments, specifically CEPA-AUDE, and whenever a PhD or a postdoc is involved, there are particular requirements relating to date of obtaining a PhD. So how do we calculate PhD age? It's fairly simple. Basically, you look at the date on your diploma and then the application deadline. For international postdoc, the gap between those can be up to 3 years. Anytime else, well, for CEPA-AUDE, it's up to 8 years. However, for embedded postdocs, and by embedded we mean if you have a CEPA-AUDE or Research 1 or Research Project 2 application, and it includes a postdoc, the PhD age can be up to 4 years. However, we do take account into certain leaves of absence. This mainly refers to parental leave, where if you've had 1 week of leave, you can deduct 2 weeks from your PhD age. A question we often get asked is, you are proposing a Research Project 1 or Research Project 2, and you have a PhD student in mind. Should I do a named candidate or an unnamed candidate? And the answer is, it depends. If the candidate you have in mind is perfectly suited for a particular project, this can speak to the feasibility of the project. You have a good candidate in mind. However, we also know that things happen. Candidates take up other offers, and that candidate might not be available. But also, if that candidate is not particularly suited for the project, it might be better to have an unnamed candidate, which you can advertise internationally. So it depends. As you are probably well aware, when applying to DFF, we use a particular application system. It's called eGrant. We think it's pretty good. However, every year, we see candidates or applicants who start the process of submitting an application way too late. So every year we have to basically decline applications that come in after the deadline. But most often than not, what happens is that people start too late and don't realize that it's not just about a project description. We require you to submit a host of information. We need you to describe particular ethical considerations. You need to describe gender composition. And we also need you to inform us about things relating to grants. So you need to describe if you've applied to DFF before, if you've been funded by DFF before, if you've submitted an application before, which was not funded for the same project, and also if you've applied for funding somewhere else for the same project. And if in the event that you do receive partial or whole funding, you are obligated to inform us of this. At the same time, we need you to fill out a budget, and filling out a budget is sort of its own science. So which is why we urge all researchers thinking of applying to DFF to draw on your local research support units. We can tell the difference, especially when it comes to the budget. So please start early and please draw on your local research support officers. What does DFF support? We support, in principle, all expenses directly related to the project. This means that you can apply for salaries, for VIPs and TAP level. You can apply for equipment up to a certain level, operating expenses, and we also provide a generous overhead. However, there are certain exceptions. We do not fund expenses directly related to open access publishing. DFF and the ministry has a policy on open access. However, you cannot apply to expenses directly related to open access publishing. However, in the budget you can put in expenses toward publishing in general, and we probably don't look at exactly how you use that money.
That doesn't make sense, I'm sorry. Please repeat that.
It's basically how you put it into the budget. We urge people to publish in open access journals. However, we do not fund expenses related to that directly. However, there is a field where you can put in general publication expenses.
Except open access.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what you just said.
I'm saying it depends on how you put it into the budget. Anyway, I don't want to answer that question any longer. However, in general, when applying, the most important thing is that you argue for all expenses in the budget, meaning that if it's in the budget, it needs to serve a clearly demarcated goal for the research. If it's in the budget, but doesn't in any overt form or in any well-argued form appear in the project description, and even in the budget for the scientific reason behind it, it is liable and likely to get cut. So every budget item needs to serve a precise purpose and goal. In addition, you need to consider proportionality. Basically, the amount you're applying for, is that proportional to the expected scientific outcome? While we provide budgets up to a certain level, maybe not all projects need to cost the max. Does it directly, does it necessarily have a positive impact, or are you just trying to get more overhead? Is what the council members will ask themselves if it doesn't serve a clear goal for the research. At the same time, if the budget is simply unrealistic, that can lead to, that is grounds for rejection as well. Then a frequently asked question is, how much money can I spend on myself as a PI? The answer is, again, it depends. However, as we'll come back to later, assessment criteria in DFF does not just relate to scientific outcomes. It is also other things. We seek to or urge further research education and things directly related to research. So while it's entirely reasonable and appropriate to apply for funds for you as a PI, it also needs to be directly related to the expected time you'll be working on the project, and it needs to be proportional. So, this is our first video testimony. This is what the council members look for when assessing budgets. This is where I tested it. No.
Everything in the budget needs to have scientific reason.
So it needs to be explained in the application. But other than that, I mean, it's the applicant knows what it needs to complete the budget, and we respect that, but we review and discuss individual budget items extensively.
I apologize. No.
Reasonable balance of expenses between salaries and what you use for the research projects, controllables, etc. If it's unreasonably high, you will pay attention to that. Why don't you just on this?
Sorry.
Try one more time.
Yeah.
Reasonable balance of expenses between salaries and what you use for the research projects, consumables, etc. If it's unreasonably high, you pay attention to that. Why are you using so much money on this? And if there's a particular part of the budget where you need more money, explain it. If it's a very high amount, because otherwise you will get maybe wonder about it, and that can become a problem because the competition is fierce. So that will be my recommendation.
Oh, that's not one. Which one is this? Okay. Going on, let's talk about the life and death of an application. We've tried illustrating how it works in DFF. The main thing you need to notice is that it starts with you applying. Before the deadline, ideally, we check if the project is eligible, and then a number of things start. Either the project goes on directly to the council who assess them and decide whether or not it gets granted, or in some cases, it goes in external review. And I'll be discussing this whole period, this whole process. Administrative pre-processing is what we do before it even reaches the council. We will check with this in hand whether your application fulfills all necessary requirements. And if not, we can reject it at that stage, and it will never even see the council. So you need to read the section, particularly section 5.1. Most often, people simply submit too late, which leads to an automatic rejection. But there are loads of other things that can lead to rejections. Most obviously, people usually, or sometimes, try to fiddle with the demands of the project description. So for all instruments, we set limitations. For Research Project 1, a project description can be up to 5 pages. However, if you use a different font size or make the margins wider, we will measure whether or not you've cheated. And if that results in your application being, say, half a page too long, we will write to the council members that they should disregard the last half a page. If, say, on the last page you have a timeline or of the deliverables, you might get a rejection stating that there is no timeline for the project. Because even though it's materially there, they will not read it. So please try fulfilling all the templates. We have a lovely template available online. Beyond that, you need to start early because we require you to submit lots of attachments. And because we do all these things so it's an open playing field and everybody follows the same rules. And if, say, a PI forgets to attach a CV or a list of publications, that will likely lead to an administrative rejection because we cannot expect the council members to go out and seek out information elsewhere. And if there is no CV or list of publications, they have no grounds for reviewing the application. And obviously, we do not accept any material submitted after the deadline, again for the same reasons. For external review, this only applies to some research instruments, mainly Research Project 2 and SEP Aude, the bigger ones, and we use two different forms: review panels, in which we fly experts in from abroad, or individual external reviewers, which is for SEP Aude, where an application will be subjected to 2 or 3 external reviews by people specialized in that particular field. What you need to be aware of is that, unlike other funds or foundations or granting institutions, reviews are only advisory in DFF. It is used to inform the reasoning of the council, but they are not obliged to follow them. So even if your application gets a 7.7, does not automatically mean it will be funded. If it gets a lower rating, does not mean that it won't get funded. We see, while there is some correlation, we see exceptions every year. Also notable is that due to the Danish Public Administration Act, we do not use blinding in any shape or form. So you will know who will be reviewing your application, and they will know who they are reviewing. From this follows also that once you have the review in hand, you get the chance of rebuttal. In our regulations, you get the review and you get the chance to clarify any factual mistakes or any misunderstandings. And the council will take these into consideration when reviewing your application in the end. You also get, through this mechanism, the chance to point out any biases or conflicts of interest you might have experienced. Actually, when you submit an application, you get to request that certain external reviews are not used for assessing your application. Let's try this again. So how do the councils use external reviews? This is Ulrik on this.
We always take a very important part of our decision making. In most cases, very important part of our decision making. In most cases, we follow the advice, but we also get our decisions in context, not we have a very broad and in some cases actually quite strong expertise in different areas, and of course there can be disagreement between the panel and other sciences. So we judge it, and sometimes with overrules both given rise to those who didn't get a perfect evaluation from outside, but also the other way around, that we not given even though it might have been possibly.
And I'll try one of these because they say basically the same thing.
External assessment is important, but it's not the only thing. And for applicants, if in doubt on whether to contribute or respond, do
Always.
So when in doubt whether or not to use your right of rebuttal, most council members will say, take advantage. It's up for you to define what a misunderstanding is, scientifically speaking. Yes. The cross-council allocation and this. First of all, the board and the DFF in general encourages interdisciplinary projects. Lisbeth is our resident expert on this process. And basically the fund has set aside specific funding for this. Basically, most applications to DFF are handled by one particular council. However, for certain and the most basic form of interdisciplinary opinion within DFF is that, say, a humanities project which draws on big data, the Humanities Council might request that FTP or the Social Sciences Council will take a look at the application to inform their reasoning. However, sometimes you get the opportunity to submit to more than one council at the same time, which starts the interdisciplinary process. The chairs will always allocate it to the most appropriate one. But basically, the thing is, you should not submit through the interdisciplinary process simply to, let's say, heighten your chances. Like maybe if FNUT doesn't like my project, maybe FTP will. You need to consider whether or not it is truly interdisciplinary. Because when writing or submitting an interdisciplinary project, that also means that it needs to be understood by more people. And more people have to agree that it's a good project. Yeah, let's try Ulrich.
It needs to be clear on what literature they are contributing to and what they're not contributing to. So it's perfectly fine to use methods from one field and apply it from another field. You just have to be very clear on where their contributions are stated.
I'll maybe not use a lot of these anymore. We should be putting them online at some point later.
Maybe you can summarize them.
I can. What they say is that, what Ulrich says is that you need to be aware of which literature you're contributing to. So it's fine to draw on other methods, but in the end, you need to be aware which literature to which you are contributing. And Ulrich is broadly in line with that. Every time.
Excuse me, the project 2 number of pages you didn't indicate.
No, I can come back to later, but for research project 2, it's 7 pages. It's all in here. The fund uses assessment criteria, which are defined here. They're the same for all instruments, mostly. However, certain research instruments serve particular objectives. So the goal of CEPAUDE is to develop research leaders and managers. An instrument like International Postdoc, beyond research excellence, also has other objectives. For instance, beyond, you have to submit a great idea, research idea, but in evaluating that proposal, the council will also evaluate whether or not the intended host institution is appropriate. So did you pick that host institution because it's close by or because it's the best place for carrying out that particular research? So that's our instrument objective. Other criteria are more generic, like scientific quality, qualifications of the applicant, and whether or not it's feasible or not, and the outcomes of the project. At the same time, DFF uses certain specific assessment criteria that, like the main heading is, does it benefit Danish research? And that can be achieved in many different ways. Through obviously producing great research, by producing research education, and through mobility in Denmark, or researchers from Denmark going abroad, or researchers from abroad going to Denmark. And also, when relevant, collaboration with public or private companies and authorities. I should mention also that the council applies very strict rules relating to disqualification. The most obvious is that if a council member has applied, they will not be assessing their own application. However, they also apply a conflict of interest to other matters. If they have a close personal or working relationship with an applicant, they will excuse themselves and not be part of the process. And in my experience, the council members apply these rules more strict than we would necessarily require them to. So when the council has reached a decision, one or two things will happen. You will receive a grant or you will receive a rejection. Temporarily speaking, the people who are successful will be contacted first. And then we will publish a list of all successful applicants on the website. This also means that is, if your application does not appear on this list, it essentially means that you have not been funded. We will send out as soon as possible grant letters and rejection letters. Grant letters get out first. Rejection letters are not as pressing concerns. What I need to point out is that even if you have received a rejection, the status of your application, even though it has been reviewed, will not change from submitted until you receive your rejection letter, at which point you will receive an email. Where if you receive a rejection letter, you will get a rejection letter which includes the council's reasoning for not granting your project, usually in the form of 2 to 6 bullet points, and an indication of where, quality-wise, you were placed in the pool. The top third to middle third to bottom third. What Ulrich and David are saying here is that when assessing an application, what they look at is not just excellence, but also trying to put you at a particular career stage. So if you don't have as much experience, if you're younger, they will adjust their expectations. However, this does not mean that all applicants can stand equal chances when applying to all our instruments. So let's come back to this table. Basically, we try to serve the whole age spectrum, experience spectrum. The ones on the right-hand side are for younger researchers, reflected in the requirements. Our DFF International Postdoc just requires you to be in possession of a PhD or be within 6 months of submitting your PhD. Where it gets really muddy is in this area. Because I've tried underlining some important things. For Research Project 1, you typically require 3+ years of independent research experience. The key word is typically. You can have less and still be eligible. Obviously, you need to be very good, but you are certainly eligible. The same thing for Research Project 2, where I want to underline another thing. The requirements are simply higher. Beyond 3+ years of experience, you also need experience of high international level, and that's a distinction between those two. For CEP Aude, there are a number of particular things. Beyond the PhD age limit, you need to be aware that, unlike the other instruments, previous management experience, i.e. maybe managing smaller grants and supervising students, is considered a plus. At the same time, mobility is considered a plus. This can mean between Danish universities, but more often not is intended to mean international experience. So these are things taken into account when assessing the proposals. Also, success rates for these instruments are not the same. Whereas most of our instruments are now at a fairly comparatively healthy level, internationally speaking, CEP Aude is still very, very competitive. We somewhat expect that percentage to go up this year because we have more funding available, but we won't know. So what I've made is this table. It's based on our yearly report, and it shows the age profile of the various instruments. Obviously, people getting the postdoc and the research education tend to be younger. And again, where it gets a little bit more muddy is at the Research Project 1, Research Project 2, and CEP Aude. It reflects that CEP Aude is geared toward a particular target group, people with some experience, and they will typically be there in their 30s or early 40s, depending on when they start their career. It also shows that if you are a younger researcher, Research Project 1 is the most typical route of attaining funding from DFF. However, there are some exceptions. Some younger researchers do receive Research Project 2. And then it gets more equal the longer we get. So be mindful of which instrument you're applying for and how you would rate yourself in terms of excellence. I have a number of videos planned, but I think we'll just go to questions at this stage. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you
No.
very much. And if you have questions, then Grit will come over with a microphone. We don't need it in this room, but we need it for the streaming. And then once in a while, we will take a break between the mics in here and go to the streaming if people from outside have questions. So I think we have a question here and there. So first here.
Thank you very much. I have one or two small questions. One is about the named and the unnamed PhD applicants. Well, not applicants, but additions to the grant. Why it is obviously for an unnamed candidate impossible to indicate all the qualities that your expected person might have.
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of the named applicant, you can say all the nice things that you know about this person. But so, if an unnamed candidate for some reason is not considered fundable, will you turn it in to an unnamed candidate for the same reason?
The council can do that, yeah. At the same time, if it's an unnamed candidate for a postdoc thing, the council will need to see the CV and...
for a postdoc, of course.
Yeah.
But not for a PhD.
Not for a PhD. Well, I mean, yeah, we need to see... At some point, the council will still need to see at least that diploma and things. So
at the very end, after the grant is funded, if it's funded, and you have decided on which PhD person you would like to hire, is that the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you need to document that they are within the age limits for an embedded postdoc. Right. So, for instance, their PhD is has been achieved within 4 years. So, I mean, again, there's no right or wrong answer here.
Right.
You said it's not. The people who are reviewing these things are not there. It's like any other hiring situation at a university. It's whether or not a person is qualified or not. But I mean, the council always has the right to reject a named candidate and make it into an unnamed candidate.
So it's perhaps safer to have it a named candidate because there's the likelihood that it could be turned into an unnamed candidate, in which case you have more freedom to decide who you would like to hire.
Yeah, or they could cut that bit of the project as well.
Right, no, okay. The other thing is the PI salary. You made no indication whether there's any limitation to the PI salary. A PI salary is allowed in total, for example, or in part?
Formally speaking, you can apply for all the PI funding you need, and projects differ as to the needs and the level of involvement of a PI researcher. However, the more money you're applying for the PI researcher, the less money is available for other things.
Right.
So that will weigh down in that sense. However, certain things cannot necessarily be performed by a PhD or a postdoc.
Right. The final question is in terms of the list of things that go into the ranking, are they in the rank order as you listed them, or were they in random order? I mean, objectives, quality, qualifications, feasibility?
The criteria are not numerical in nature. They are all qualitative.
Thank you.
I think we had a question down there, right? Okay. All right. Yeah, you're.
Hello. I have two questions. That is like, how big a problem is this? We are five researchers gathered by interests and qualifications, but we are all women.
Mhm.
So the question is, how big a problem is that?
I mean, that's fairly easy to say. Gender is not an explicit assessment criterion. We put it in the application form to make applicants consider gender composition as a factor. And obviously, if you have a team of women, it's less of a problem if it was the other way around.
Okay.
And it's, again, it doesn't, the ultimate funding decision will be taken entirely on excellence grounds. So it's not, it doesn't matter who the women are, it's whether or not how good they are.
Okay. So my next question is, how big a problem is it that we've been founded before?
It's not a problem at all,
Oh.
as long as it's for a different project.
Yeah, sure.
All right. We have a question here. Well, maybe I can.
Is there any way around the general requirement of applicant having a PhD level or a Danish lecture level?
You need to have a PhD or similar qualifications. So, and a Jungbedømmelse is fine. Again, it depends on the instrument. So well, obviously, the main thing is a PhD or equivalent qualifications. You don't require, for any other instruments, actually, any particular position at the university. You don't need to be a associate professor or professor. However, if the project includes, say, research education, how the supervision will be carried out needs to be accounted for. So it might need an involvement of someone able to, it depends. Some universities have different rules. It just needs to make that explicit.
Hi, hello. I have two questions. The first one is on the kind of research that you fund, because you award excellence and originality, and I'm guessing that's most often basic research. How do you feel about industrial research or experimental development?
That we have a council, the technological and production sciences, which handles applied research to a certain degree, but yeah, it is mainly. I would urge you to have a look at the call for proposals where we've tried defining which kinds of fields we cover. But ultimately, it's like you say. In technological and production sciences, there can be an applied element.
So the second question is, I'm from the University College Absalon, and we don't have professors as they do in the universities. We have different titles, right?
Yeah.
So basically, you were just asked the question, so maybe you can answer that again regarding these titles we have. So you don't need to be a PhD. You need to have some.
Well, you need to be aside from the international postdoc, and for the PhD outside of the university, you need a PhD or equivalent qualifications.
Same. Okay.
I have a question on this external review panel. You write that for social sciences, all applications for a research project 2 will, where possible, be submitted for review. What does this "where possible" mean?
I mean, I'm a little bit surprised by that. I'm in charge of that process myself, and all Research Project 2 proposals go to the panels. Sorry? I mean, all the Research Project 2s for the social sciences goes to external panels.
Okay. So not where possible.
I mean, I imagine it's a fail-safe. What if the panel doesn't?
All the way down where possible.
Yeah. So I think it's what if they don't. The council, I mean, the panel can decide that they're simply not qualified to assess an application, say, or a snowstorm happens. So I think it's legalese for something like that.
All right, we have 2 questions up here. First you, and then you.
Could you please raise your hand higher?
You can also say your name.
Yeah,
and, where you're
Magnus Wahlberg. I was rejected last year for a research project 1, but I got some positive feedback, so I'm thinking of rewriting that application. Is that a good idea or not?
I mean, it's certainly an excellent question, because I forgot to mention it. First of all, we don't put limitation on how many applications you submit for, as long as they're different ideas. You can submit 8 if you want. Also, obviously you have to specify whether or not you applied before for the same project, and with good feedback, but no, basically, people who submit again for the same idea have high success rates. So, assuming you got some positive criticism and some things to improve, I would urge you to resubmit. Obviously, that's not the same thing as being funded, because we might get new or better, more or better applications this year. The competition changes every year. It might also get easier.
I just have a question on this. I guess it's kind of the top level question. Do you, or does the DFF decide in advance how much goes to each of the fields, and which of the grants gets how much, or is it?
It is based on both an algorithm and like a political struggle between the councils. So basically, every council gets a certain amount, which basically mainly reflects the amount of applications they get every year. So it tries to encompass how big the field is and how much need there is for funding. So which is also why success rates, while with minor differences, are more or less the same across the councils. I believe natural sciences is 1% higher than the others, so it's in the yearly report as well.
There's a question down there. 2 questions.
You were going to show us some video clips at the end of your talk where the 2 council chairs say something about what in their mind makes up for an excellent application. Can you briefly summarize the key points from what they are recommending?
Yeah, we have a video with Ulrich trying to define what excellence is, and I mainly put it in it because it's sort of circular. It's basically, they look at an excellent idea, an excellent researcher, and excellent methods, and it's hard to define. So the answer is basically that you know what's excellent in your fields and how you put in there. But a number of the other videos, they talk about other things they'd like to see more of. What they all emphasize is that they'd like people to be better at writing to a broad audience. So every council is inherently interdisciplinary. In the social sciences, we have fieldwork-based sociologists and macroeconomic economists, and any application needs to be able to be fundamentally understood by everyone in the council. Ulrich talks about how, they both talk a lot about feasibility. So, the idea doesn't just have to be good. It also needs to be shown why you and the team are the right ones for carrying out that research. And also realism in many ways. So if you are, in terms of expected outcomes, you are proposing, say, 10 high-impact journal articles, but in your whole career you only produce 1 or 2, maybe it's unfeasible. And what else do they talk about? Ulrich is kind enough to say that you should look in here, because while there is no fixed template for designing how an application should be, you can use all the headings you want. However, like every instrument and the general properties area will say what it has to include. Those kinds of things. Again, I hopefully these things will get online sometime in the near future, and I apologize for the technical difficulties.
I have two questions. The first question is there any experience-based or informal weighting between the merits of the project and the qualifications of the applicant?
I can't really speak to what goes on in the minds of the council members. It both forms part of the assessment. As I mean, they're both key. Some projects will be assessed more on idea-based, and others will be more on. You can make an argument that Research Project 2 is more CV-based and Research Project 1 is more idea-based, but it's not that simple. It depends on a host of factors. Mainly that is it feasible? They're probably sometimes more conservative than they like to be. So you don't just have to have a good idea. You also need to prove that you can actually come do the research. So CV matters, and the CV always matters, and the idea always matters. It's the boring answer.
I once had an application rejected on the grounds that the group hadn't done research together before, sort of a risk-based argument.
Yeah.
So the question is, collaboration is supposedly always good, is to get the right qualifications, experience, and implementation, etc.
Yeah.
But are there any things? Of course, you can't answer what is the right strategy, but maybe you could point to some considerations on the side of collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration, as a risk factor or as an asset.
It depends.
Okay.
I can't really speak to whether or not there's a good or a wrong strategy in that. I can say that if success rates for interdisciplinary projects are the same as in all other projects. Now, it wasn't always like that, but it's been like that the last couple of years. Certain instruments are geared toward building new collaborative research projects. That would be Research Project 2. But I can't micromanage specific casework. For instance, I don't understand the council's reasoning for not thinking you've collaborated enough beforehand, unfortunately.
Again, thank you. I've added one or two small questions.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, the understanding was that in terms of the spectrum from high risk to low risk for these projects, the FSS at least was somewhere in between the European Research Council, where it's supposed to be high risk, high gain, which means that you actually have to be very creative. And at the other end, you had the NIH, where you almost have to have done the research already to prove that it can be done. And the understanding was that the FSS or the DFF was somewhere halfway. Is that a fair assessment still?
I can say that the move towards more high risk, high gain is a strategic priority for the board. I wouldn't say we're there yet.
Right.
Things take a lot of time to change
Right.
in councils.
Right.
So I'd probably say it's safe to assume that we're still somewhere in the middle.
Right. In terms of the past grants and the past successes, they're actually online, are they not? I mean, all the way back, as long as you have the list of things you have interacted with the...
Do you mean for particular names and applications, or?
That all your applications, you can go and look at them online, right? All your past applications.
All your past applications are
all your
online.
past successes. So when you need to list all of this stuff from, say, way back, or then you can actually go.
I'm not entirely sure how long at least as long as we've had the eGrant system, it should be there.
So the information is actually available to you already.
I suppose, yeah.
Right. And in terms of the
the reason why we ask you to do it is because we cannot assess
Right,
whether or
no,
not
I understand.
whether or not it's the same project or a new project or those kinds of things.
But it makes it simpler that you can actually go in yourself to,
Yeah, sure.
to find it and put it. So that was it. Thank you for the time being.
We have a question over here. And just to everybody who's streaming, we don't get any questions here, so I don't know. If you have questions, please write them to us.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the budget. And so when the PI and the key collaborators are not going to take any salary, so they're all co-financed, is it still worth putting their names within the budget so it's clear to the evaluators that who's involved in overseeing this? Because obviously there is the still percentage contribution within the budget form.
I'm not a key expert on budgets, but I'd say yes, you should still always put it in. And also, if there is co-financing, there is also a field for that. So, yes, is the question, is the answer.
All right. Other questions? Otherwise, I'll ask one. I think the success rates are rather high compared to what they've been earlier years.
Yes,
Is that right?
It's getting healthier. We have
How
more,
did you
we have
manage to
we
do
have more
that?
money, and believe there was slightly fewer applications last year. So that's how the number of applications is more or less stable. Or it was rising for a number of years, whereas our basic grant was falling, which equals lower success rates. But we got more money this year, which means higher success rates.
I have a short question now. You have emphasized in your latest press release that you have allocated a specific amount of money for interdisciplinary projects.
Yes.
You just write a specific amount of money, which could you elaborate a bit how you plan to do this? Do you know how much money? Is it a certain amount of projects you want to assess in the interdisciplinary area?
Or
how do you want to?
For
make
each,
this?
it's based on previous applications, and well, basically the board will decide for every instrument, every call, how much money should be set aside. And the reason why it's a separate budget is so that so there's no competition between the councils.
Okay.
So it's a separate budget, and it's evaluated by a separate cross-council committee. So it's their own money. It does not affect the end project of any of the councils.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if it's publicly available how much it is. It was certainly public available. No, it's not.
No, it's just
Yeah.
you just
You can-
wrote specific amount.
Yeah,
That's what was your term.
yeah. It's yeah.
Other questions?
I'll be happy to ask one more if I may.
Yes, certainly.
And that has to do with age. And while there is the lower limit that you have discussed in relation to PhDs and doctoral degrees, I suppose, then of course the official position is that there's no upper limit in terms of age, I suppose.
Yes.
Except the consideration that the applicant should hopefully be alive at the end of the granting period.
Yeah, I guess in that sense it comes into feasibility as well. Yeah.
All right. Other questions? Then I'll ask one more.
Okay.
I have one question now.
Okay, fine.
Was maybe too specific, but I want to hear a little bit about this equivalent to a PhD. How do you measure that?
On a case-by-case basis. But
So-
there are certain instances, at least in Denmark, where universities who have employed someone for a long time at a research level, I don't know the translation, but a Jungtbedømmelse, and that's one availability. So it's on a case-by-case basis.
Right. See, I don't know exactly if the associate professor or adjunct bedømmelse at universities is equivalent to the assistant lecturer bedømmelse at university colleges.
Yeah, I would expect not, but I can't say for certain.
Okay.
All right.
It's not based on position. You might be employed at something that sounds like it's based on having achieved similar qualification as a PhD. So production of a certain amount of academic work.
Other questions? Otherwise, I'll ask when all the applications for each council, will they be read by all the council members?
All council members read all applications.
Okay, and how many do they get, basically?
Depends on the council.
Yeah.
And it depends on the instrument. So
Yeah.
basically we review there are not that many non-university research education applications.
No.
And there are about 120 international postdoc applications every round. And then the numbers get really big.
Research Project 1 is the biggest?
Research Project 1 and Research Project 2 it amounts to more than half of our budget. It's maybe 3/3. That's where most of the applications are and where most of the funding is. And then CEPAUD as well is in the hundreds as well. And yeah, we can combine these two with the success rate. And that's the.
Yeah.
Is there an error in the table? You say 4.8 years for the DFF1 and the project 2. Then the previous table that you show us.
I mean, that just is age profile. It has nothing to do when they obtain their PhD. We don't actually have that data available.
Okay. Both project 1 and project 2 is the same.
Yes, I can't explain it except that it's how it is.
Did you hear the question?
He just commented that the average age of Research Project 1 and Research Project 2 is the same, which is probably just reflects that the pool of applicants is somewhat similar.
It didn't used to be that way,
No.
but it's now.
Mm.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Other questions? Otherwise, I would like a last question here about your name. Is there any difference between the fund and the council? You know, before you were called Research Council, now you're called. Meaning, is it bottom-up research and it is totally free, or do you prioritize certain areas?
It's a good question. It changed with our new law, which came into force in 2017, where the Parliament decided that we should change the name so it was more similar to Innovation Fund Denmark. And fundamentally, our obligations and roles have not changed. Our main role is still bottom-up research. The new rule gave us certain new competences. Basically, from last year and maybe next year, we don't know. We also fund thematic research set down by the Parliament. We had a separate call for proposals last May, or last March actually, and applications are being reviewed right now. We don't know if we are doing the same thing next year because we don't know if that's going to be set aside as a separate budget. The key thing is that even though the themes have been set aside by the Parliament, the way in which we process and review them is equally is based on the same amount of scientific rigorousness. So the assessment criteria are the same as Research Project 1 and Research Project 2. The budget rules are the same. It's just that some broad themes have been decided by the Parliament. But that budget has nothing to do with our main budget relating to supporting independent, free, research-based.
Okay, so there's not less money.
There's not less money, and there will never, because there are separate budget items.
All right, okay. Other questions? Yes? I'll give it to you. 2 seconds.
Thanks. So you mentioned that there are no formal limits to how many applications you can submit at once, right?
As long as they're not the same idea.
Pardon?
As long as they're separate ideas.
Yeah, sure. But do you have any data to suggest whether they are more or less likely to be successful?
It happens very rarely that we receive more than one.
Okay.
But I don't have it at hand. It will be an interesting question to look at.
Thanks.
I know by chance that I've looked at one who was successful with one and unsuccessful with another, because I did some statistics one day, but I don't have any.
Well, at least it shows that it's not impossible to get your. Yeah.
It's more like it's probably the time constraint issue.
Yeah.
In the sense that it takes time to propose things.
Yeah, but there might also be a bias if they get tired of reading the same person's applications over and over again.
Again, as I told you, like re-applications have higher success rates.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
Only if the idea is really, really bad, so to speak.
Yes. One last question.
Yeah. One last thing. Yes. Thank you. Understood. At the DFF2, it's 4.3 million kroner.
Yes.
I was wondering, is there a particular explanation for this somewhat odd duration? Why not 4 or 5 years? Is there a particular background for that?
Well, I mean, it is. Do you mean how?
No, yeah.
Do you mean why the budget is where it is, or why the length is where it is?
No, I'm sorry. I misread. I meant the 4.3 million.
Yeah. It used to be lower, and now price increases have mean that it's now at that point. I believe the board looks at what is needed for carrying. This is excluding overhead, I should mention. So in actual terms, it's bigger. That is what is needed for carrying out larger projects, and also taking into account the need for funding more projects. I should mention, well, not all councils have had Research Project 1 until recently. The Humanities only introduced it recently. So while not a lot of grants were given last year, there is always an adjustment period for new instruments. Yeah.
So is there any reason why, or have you considered making applications anonymous to the extent that it's possible?
It's thus far illegal owing to the Public Administration Act. So as when you...
But you could conceal the information from the board until the...
The board is not involved in assessing applications in any shape or form.
But so the council, what you call the people who... Why would they need to know the names of the applicants?
Because it's in the law.
Okay. Sounds really strange.
If you want them changed, you should write your local parliament member. I assume it's the same reason for when you apply for a position in at a university. And
but if you apply for a position in an orchestra, for instance, you don't have to reveal the name of the gender of the person.
That's true, but I mean
until after the process has been run through, I guess you could do this if you wanted to.
No, I don't think. I mean, that's what we've been informed, that this is how we have to do it. That's fine. I mean, that's the legal rationale in the ministry.
I have a question regarding when you are an applicant for example, a research project 1, and you are an assistant professor.
Yes.
So as a relative outsider, it's become clear to me that there are two classes of assistant professor in the university system in Denmark. Those that have full creative control over the direction of their research, what their group members do, and don't answer to anyone apart from their head of section or department. And those who are just titled assistant professor because they've otherwise been a postdoc too long, but they're still working for somebody. So if you're an assistant professor who has creative control over your own research, is this something that is either weighted more heavily in your status as an applicant, and is it something that should be emphasised more in the project description to reflect that? Or does it otherwise not matter?
I cannot answer that question. I can say that what is in the call is that what is valued is independent research experience. So obviously if you are more independent in your research, you should probably highlight that.
All right, more questions? No? Then, yeah, we will just say good luck to everybody and with applications, and you know, you can contact your local research support offices. They are at all 5 faculties. And thank you for coming.
And we'll be here to answer individual questions
Yeah.
as well, for however long you need.
So if anybody needs to ask more questions, then please stay. Otherwise, good luck.
Det er sådan, vi skal have vores egen computer med, jo. Det vil de ikke have.